Friends, please check if you're already subscribed to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us. We need to reach 1,000 subscribers to generate income and continue with the channel. Now, let's get to the video. I stood there smiling. It wasn't a warm smile. It didn't reach my eyes. It was the kind of smile you learn when you grow up understanding that resistance only creates more damage, and compliance buys you time. The dining table sat between us like a neutral witness. Old oak. Water stains. Small burns from cigarettes my father swore he quit years ago. I knew every mark on that table. I had cleaned it. Sanded it. Covered it with plastic when they entertained guests who believed we were a perfect family. Tonight, the table wasn't hosting dinner. It was hosting a funeral. Sheets of paper were spread across it, carefully organized, color-coded, clipped together. My mother had always loved order. Loved the illusion that neatness meant control. Property valuations. Account balances. Legal terminology spoken casually, like it wasn't cutting something alive in half. She tapped her nail against the wood. Tap. 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 My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, chin lifted. He wore that familiar expression, the one that said the decision had already been made, and this conversation was merely a formality. They spoke about what they had built. The house. The land. The accounts. What they sacrificed. What they deserved. They never once said my name. And I smiled. Because I had learned that interrupting them only made things worse. Because correcting their version of reality invited punishment disguised as disappointment. Because women like me were taught early that gratitude should replace fairness. You'll be fine, my mother said eventually, eyes still fixed on the paperwork. Not a question. Not comfort. A conclusion. Fine. That word pressed against my chest as they continued. I watched her pen glide across paper, dividing years into columns. Watched my father nod along, satisfied. They sounded like business partners closing a deal, not parents dismantling the life of their child. I nodded when expected. I stayed quiet when silence was required. And all the while, memories stacked inside me, one on top of the other, heavy and sharp. I remembered being 16, clocking out at midnight, hands smelling like grease and bleach, slipping my tips into my backpack before walking home in the dark. I remembered pretending I didn't hear the neighbors whisper when the power got shut off again. I remembered lying to teachers, saying I was just tired, when exhaustion lived in my bones. I remembered my mother asking me to help for a while. My father promising it wouldn't be forever. Temporary. Temporary stretched into years. I remembered signing documents I didn't understand, trusting their smiles, trusting their voices. I remembered managing accounts, filing taxes, negotiating with suppliers for the family business, unpaid, unnamed, invisible. Family helps family. That phrase had been my leash. Now I was 32 years old, standing in the same room where I once did homework by candlelight, listening to my parents divide what they assumed was theirs. They spoke about the house as if I hadn't kept it alive. They spoke about the business as if my hands hadn't steadied it through every crisis. They spoke about the future as if mine had never existed. I smiled wider. Because something had shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It wasn't grief, no, that had passed. It was clarity. They thought this meeting was about fairness. About closure. About moving on. But I understood something they didn't. This wasn't the end of something I loved. This was the beginning of something they had underestimated. I folded my hands in front of me. I lowered my eyes just enough to appear small. Agreeable. Safe. I let them believe I was swallowing the loss. If this story is already making your chest feel tight, take a second to like the video. What's coming next only gets deeper. Because the most dangerous woman in the room isn't the loudest one. She isn't the angriest. She's the one who listens. Who remembers. Who waits. And as my mother signed the last page and my father pushed his chair back, satisfied, I realized something chillingly simple. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. They were wrong. I didn't leave the table right away. That was my first quiet rebellion. My father stood up, already reaching for his jacket, already moving on with his night like nothing irreversible had just happened. My mother gathered the papers into a neat stack, tapping the edges against the table to align them, order restored, at least on the surface. "Make sure you lock up when you leave," she said casually, like I was still 16 and borrowing the car. I nodded. That nod cost me more than they would ever know. When the door finally closed behind them, the house exhaled. Not relief, something heavier. Like a long-held breath finally released into the dark. I stood there alone, the overhead light humming softly, staring at the chair my father had just vacated. For a moment, I wondered if this was what freedom felt like. Then the weight hit. I sat down slowly, running my fingers over the grain of the table. I could trace my life in it. Every groove a memory. Every dent a compromise. I pressed my palm flat against the wood and felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not sadness. Resolve. I thought about all the things I never said out loud. How I never told them I postponed college because tuition went to keeping the business afloat. How I never admitted I stopped dating because I couldn't imagine building a life that wasn't constantly on pause. How I learned to swallow resentment so well that even I forgot it was there, until now. They had raised me to be reliable. Dependable. Invisible. And I had been excellent at it. I stood up and walked through the house slowly, like a stranger. The living room couch where I slept when my bedroom was rented out. The kitchen where I memorized supplier prices better than my own birthday. The hallway mirror where I practiced smiling before family gatherings, making sure no one could see the cracks. In my room, I opened the closet and pulled out a small box hidden behind old coats. Inside were folders. Copies. Notes. USB drives. Things I had kept without knowing exactly why. Only that something in me said don't let go of this. Receipts. Emails. Signed documents. Proof. I sat on the bed and laughed quietly, the sound unfamiliar and sharp. All those years they thought I wasn't paying attention. All those times they spoke freely in front of me, assuming loyalty meant blindness. They never considered that survival teaches observation. If you're still here, still listening, make sure you're subscribed. This story is only beginning to reveal its teeth. I powered on my laptop, the glow lighting the room in soft blue. File after file opened like doors I had locked for too long. Patterns emerged. Transfers that didn't make sense. Decisions made in my name without my consent. And suddenly, the smile I wore at the table made sense. It hadn't been weakness. It had been instinct. They thought I was unprepared. They thought I was dependent. They thought I would accept whatever scraps they left behind. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to check, was that the quiet daughter they underestimated had been keeping records. And records tell stories. By the time the clock read 2:17 a.m., I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was focused. Because the most dangerous phase of betrayal isn't the moment you're hurt. It's the moment you understand exactly how. And I finally did. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was awake in a way I had never been before. The house was silent, the kind of silence that makes every thought louder. I sat at my desk with the curtains open, watching the streetlight flicker outside my window, my laptop still warm beneath my hands. The glow felt clinical, like an interrogation room. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. I was questioning my entire life. Every document I opened rewrote a memory. Every number challenged a conversation I once trusted. Transfers labeled operational expenses. Accounts created without my knowledge. My signature scanned, reused, repurposed. They hadn't just used my labor. They had used my identity. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the realization settle. There it was, the line I hadn't crossed before. Exploitation I could forgive. Manipulation I could rationalize. But theft. That demanded clarity. I remembered my father's voice, steady and calm, teaching me how to balance spreadsheets when I was barely out of high school. "This will help you one day," he said. I believed him. I didn't realize one day meant against him. I opened a new document and started writing. Not emotions. Not accusations. Facts. Dates. Amounts. Signatures. Witnesses. The language of consequences. Somewhere between the third and fourth page, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "You okay?" Today was a lot. I stared at the screen. I imagined a dozen replies. Angry ones. Honest ones. Ones that would finally expose the truth. Instead, I typed, "I'm fine. Just processing." And I meant it, just not the way she thought. I hit send and placed the phone face down, like closing a coffin. If you're still with me, still feeling this slow burn, take a second to like the video. This is the point where quiet stories turn sharp. By morning, I had a plan. Not revenge, not yet. Something cleaner. Something surgical. I booked consultations. Read laws I had once ignored because they trusted me not to read them. Learned how power actually works when it's written down instead of spoken. I showered, dressed, and looked at myself in the mirror. For the first time, I didn't practice smiling. I practiced neutrality. Because neutrality unsettles people who rely on guilt and emotion to control you. I left the house with a folder under my arm, copies only. Originals stayed hidden. I wasn't reckless. I had spent too many years cleaning up their messes to make one of my own. As I locked the door, I realized something else. They thought my strength came from loyalty. From obligation. From love. They never imagined it could come from distance. And distance was something I was finally allowing myself. By the time I stepped onto the sidewalk, the sun had risen, warm and indifferent. Life continued. Neighbors walked their dogs. Cars passed. No one knew a war had just begun inside me. But it had. Quietly. Methodically. Irreversibly. Distance changes how people see you. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. I simply stopped being available. No immediate replies. No last-minute favors. No fixing problems that weren't mine anymore. At first, they didn't notice. They never did, until inconvenience entered the room. My mother called 2 days later, her voice sweet, careful. "I can't access one of the accounts," she said. Not please. Not can you help. Just an expectation dressed as calm. "I'm not managing those anymore," I replied. Silence. A small one. But sharp. "Well, you always did it better," she said, as if that were a compliment and not a confession. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I answered. That was the moment. Not when I uncovered the documents. Not when I realized the theft. But when I said no, and didn't soften it. After that, the calls changed tone. Shorter. Edgier. My father left a voicemail instead of speaking directly, his words measured, cautious. He never liked leaving records. Funny how quickly people become careful when control slips. I kept my days full. Consultations. Research. Quiet lunches alone where no one asked anything of me. I learned how much space I had been giving away without realizing it. At night, doubt tried to visit. You're overreacting. They did their best. They're still your parents. I let those thoughts pass through me like weather. They had ruled me for years. They didn't get to rule me now. If you've ever been raised to confuse obedience with love, stay with me. And don't forget to like the video, this story understands you. A week later, my mother asked to meet. Just coffee, she said. Just to talk. I agreed. Because strategy requires proximity, just close enough to observe. She chose a cafe she liked. Bright. Public. Safe. She arrived early, already seated, hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. When she saw me, her smile flickered, just for a second. She felt it. The shift. You seem different, she said after a few minutes. Distant. I've been busy, I replied. With what? My eyes met hers. Calm. Open. Empty. My life. She laughed softly, but there was tension under it. We worry about you. That word again. We. I know, I said. You always have. We sat in that space, polite, careful, circling something neither of us named. She asked questions designed to gather information. I answered with nothing useful. When we stood to leave, she touched my arm. You know, everything we did was for the family. I looked at her hand. Then back at her face. So was what I did, I said. And I walked away. I didn't look back. Because the most unsettling thing you can do to people who took advantage of your presence is prove you no longer need it. Fear has a sound. It's subtle. A hesitation before words. A pause where confidence used to live. I heard it for the first time in my father's voice when he finally called. Not texted. Not left a voicemail. Called. Your mother says you've been distant, he said, opening with concern, closing with accusation. I've been busy, I repeated. With what? He asked, sharper this time. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Sorting things out. Another pause. He cleared his throat. You know, we're finalizing paperwork soon. There are timelines. Legal things. I know, I said. I've been reading. That was when the air changed. You don't need to get involved in all that, he said quickly. It's complicated. I've handled complicated before, I replied. For you. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The calculating kind. After that call, the pressure began. Small things at first. Subtle guilt. Reminders of everything they'd done for me. Childhood stories rewritten to make me sound ungrateful. Vulnerable. Then came irritation. My mother stopped pretending. You're acting like we hurt you, she snapped during another call. This is business. Business. That word again. I let it settle between us. Then we should all be very careful, I said. She hung up on me. If this tension feels familiar, you're not alone. Take a second to like the video. Stories like this survive because people recognize themselves in them. That night, I received an email. Subject, document clarification. Professional. Polite. Too polite. Attached was a revised agreement. New language. New clauses. Quiet adjustments that benefited them and boxed me out completely. They thought I wouldn't read it. I read every word. And there it was, buried, deliberate. A clause that transferred responsibility without authority. Risk without control. The kind of thing you slip in when you think the other person is tired. Emotional. Distracted. I closed my laptop slowly. This wasn't misunderstanding anymore. This was intention. I forwarded the document to my attorney and added one line. Is this what it looks like? The reply came the next morning. Yes. And it's worse than you think. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something colder. Confirmation. From that moment on, I stopped wondering if I was being too harsh. Too sensitive. Too suspicious. I wasn't imagining it. They had made a mistake. Not by taking advantage of me. Not by underestimating me. But by assuming I would keep protecting them after I stopped protecting myself. I didn't confront them. I didn't warn them. I prepared. Because the most dangerous phase of any conflict is when one side thinks it still has time. And they thought they did. There's a moment in every quiet war when preparation turns into movement. Mine came on a Tuesday. No dramatic weather. No warning signs. Just an email marked urgent, sent at 8:06 a.m., from my father. He wanted to clear the air. He suggested lunch. Neutral ground. His tone was cooperative, almost warm. Too warm. I agreed. Because when people who have never apologized suddenly want peace, it's rarely about healing. It's about control slipping faster than expected. We met at a restaurant near the courthouse. His choice. Strategic. He liked proximity to authority, it made him feel protected. He arrived early, already seated, already rehearsed. You look tired, he said as I sat down. I've been busy, I replied. There it was again, my favorite sentence. The one that gave him nothing. He launched into explanations before the menus arrived. How stressful this transition had been. How much pressure he was under. How none of this was personal. I listened. Not because I believed him. But because people reveal everything when they think they're still in control. He spoke about legal exposure. About risk. About loose ends. He never used my name in those sentences, but I heard it anyway. At one point, he leaned forward. You don't want this to get messy, he said quietly. Not a threat. A reminder. I met his eyes. Neither do you. His smile froze. If you're still here, still feeling this shift, make sure you're subscribed. This is where the story stops pretending. I placed my folder on the table. Not open. Not dramatic. Just present. I've retained counsel, I said. That was it. No accusations. No raised voice. Just fact. His face changed, not explosively, but in layers. Surprise. Calculation. Then something like regret, buried too deep to surface. You didn't need to do that, he said. Yes, I replied. I did. The rest of the lunch was quiet. Short sentences. Careful words. When we stood to leave, he reached for my arm, then stopped himself. He knew. By the time I stepped outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Sharper. Like I had crossed a threshold and couldn't return even if I wanted to. And I didn't want to. That afternoon, my attorney confirmed what I already sensed, there was enough evidence to force transparency. Enough to slow everything down. Enough to make them nervous. Not enough to destroy them. Not yet. Because I wasn't interested in chaos. I was interested in truth. And truth takes time. That night, I slept. Really slept. The kind of sleep that comes after a decision you can't undo. The line had been crossed. And on the other side of it, I was no longer asking for anything. I was waiting. People think confrontation is loud. It isn't. Real confrontation happens in delays. In sudden politeness. In the way people start choosing their words like they're stepping around broken glass. After that lunch, everything slowed down. Emails took longer to arrive. Messages were rewritten, unsent, rewritten again. When my mother called, her voice sounded rehearsed, like she was reading from a script she didn't believe in. "We just want to make sure everyone feels respected," she said. Everyone. I noticed how carefully she avoided saying you. They had lawyers now. I could tell by the language. By the stiffness. By the way warmth vanished from every interaction and was replaced with structure. Bullet points. Summaries. Attachments. They were building walls. So was I. My attorney warned me, once this moves forward, they may try to discredit you. Emotionally first. Legally later. I laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. They had been doing that my whole life. The difference now was that I was watching instead of absorbing. If you've ever been painted as difficult the moment you stop complying, stay with me. And don't forget to like the video, this part matters. The first leak came from a cousin. She called late, voice hesitant. "Your mom's worried," she said. "She thinks you're being influenced. That someone's putting ideas in your head." I thanked her for checking in. After we hung up, I sat in the dark and let it sink in. That was their move. Not denial. Not accountability. Reframing. I wasn't wrong, I was confused. I wasn't hurt, I was manipulated. I wasn't acting with intention, I was being led. It almost made me proud. They were predictable. That meant I was prepared. Then came the second leak. A former employee of the family business reached out. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His message was short. "I heard things are getting complicated. I should probably tell you what I know." We met quietly. No paper trail. No drama. What he told me filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed. Decisions made behind closed doors. Money shifted to protect themselves, not the business. Not me. When he finished, he looked nervous. "I always wondered why you stayed," he said. I smiled. So did I. By the time I got home, the picture was complete enough to scare them. Because truth doesn't just expose lies. It exposes patterns. And patterns are hard to explain away. That night, I wrote everything down, not emotionally, not angrily. Just clean. Chronological. Undeniable. I wasn't collecting weapons. I was assembling a mirror. And soon, they would be forced to look into it. They didn't confront me right away. That was how I knew they were scared. People who feel powerful rush. People who feel exposed stall. Weeks passed in careful silence. Legal requests. Formal updates. Polite distance stretched thin enough to snap. I watched them move pieces without understanding the board had changed. They still thought this was a negotiation. It wasn't. My attorney called one afternoon and said, "They're asking for mediation." I closed my eyes. Mediation wasn't peace. It was containment. They wanted control over the narrative before it escaped the room. "I'll agree," I said. On record. The meeting room was sterile. Glass walls. Neutral colors. No family photos. No history to hide behind. My parents sat across from me like strangers who shared my face but none of my reality. For the first time, they didn't lead the conversation. The mediator spoke. My attorney spoke. Documents were exchanged, slowly, deliberately. Each page carried weight. Each pause stretched longer than the last. Then my mother spoke. "We never meant to hurt her," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Everything we did was to protect the family." I felt it then, the old reflex to soften. To forgive. To absorb. I didn't. I leaned forward. "Then explain why my name appears on liabilities I never approved," I said calmly. "Explain why my signature was used without my consent. Explain why I worked for years without compensation while profits were redirected." The room changed. My father stared at the table. My mother blinked too fast. They weren't prepared for my voice, not raised, not emotional, not asking. Stating. "If this story has you holding your breath, take a second to like the video. This is the moment the truth stops whispering." They tried to answer. They really did. But explanations fall apart when they've been built on convenience instead of facts. Every response created another question. Every defense revealed another inconsistency. And then it happened. The mediator cleared her throat. "Based on what I'm seeing," she said carefully, "there are serious concerns here." Concerns. Such a gentle word for exposure. My mother finally looked at me, not past me, not through me. At me. And for the first time, she didn't see her daughter. She saw risk. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because the mirror was finally in front of them. And they couldn't look away. The shift after mediation was immediate. No more warmth. No more family language. Everything became defensive. Their lawyers spoke louder. Their emails grew longer. Entire paragraphs dedicated to my emotional state. To my interpretation of events. To how stress might have influenced my memory. They weren't arguing facts anymore. They were arguing me. My attorney warned me this would happen. "When people can't deny what they did," she said, "they question who you are." So they painted me carefully. I was overwhelmed. Confused. Resentful. A daughter who misunderstood generosity as exploitation. A woman who couldn't separate love from business. I read every word with a strange calm. Because I recognized the tactic. It was the same one they used when I was younger. When I cried, I was dramatic. When I questioned, I was ungrateful. When I stood firm, I was cold. Nothing about this was new, only the audience had changed. If you've ever watched someone try to turn your boundaries into flaws, stay with me. And don't forget to like the video. This part hurts in a very familiar way. They requested psychological evaluations. Delays. Extensions. Anything that could exhaust me into backing down. I didn't. I documented. Every claim met a timeline. Every accusation met a record. Every attempt to define me met evidence that contradicted it. And slowly, something beautiful happened. They contradicted themselves. One document described me as uninvolved. Another accused me of over-involvement. One claimed I lacked understanding. Another blamed me for decisions only someone with deep understanding could make. They were unraveling. Not loudly. Not publicly. But consistently. Then came the call I didn't expect. My mother. No lawyers. No script. Just silence at first. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said finally. I closed my eyes, not in pain, but in clarity. "You never tried," I replied. She cried. Real tears this time. Not strategic. Not measured. Messy and human. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the old pull. Then she said it. "You're tearing this family apart." There it was. The final rewrite. I wasn't responding to harm. I was creating it. I took a breath. "This family survived because I held it together," I said quietly. "If it's breaking now, it's because I stopped." She hung up. And I understood something irreversible. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted restoration. The old version of me. The useful one. The silent one. And she was gone. The end didn't come with a verdict. That surprised people. They expected a courtroom. A dramatic ruling. Someone winning and someone losing in a way that could be summarized in a sentence. That's not how this ended. It ended quietly. After months of delays, exposure, and pressure they could no longer manage, the tone changed. Not in words, but in concessions. Documents were revised. Accounts frozen, then restructured. Liabilities reassigned. Ownership clarified. Not out of remorse. Out of fear. They didn't admit wrongdoing. They never would. Instead, they agreed to terms that did one crucial thing. They removed me from their reach. The business was divided. Cleanly. Permanently. The house, sold. The financial ties, severed. No apologies attached. And I accepted that. Because apologies given to avoid consequences aren't apologies. They're transactions. On the day everything was finalized, I sat alone in my apartment, listening to the city breathe outside the window. No family heirlooms. No inherited furniture. Nothing heavy with history. Just space. I expected to feel grief. I didn't. I felt light. If you've made it this far, take a second to like the video. This ending isn't loud, but it's honest. I saw my parents once more after that. Not intentionally. I passed them on the street, weeks later. They were together. Closer than they had been in years. United by loss, if nothing else. They didn't recognize me at first. And when they did, they hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. They saw someone they no longer understood. Someone they couldn't speak at or through. Someone who didn't carry their expectations in her posture anymore. I nodded politely. They didn't nod back. And I kept walking. Because the real victory wasn't money. Or justice. Or even truth on paper. It was this. I no longer needed them to see me correctly. I knew who I was. The daughter who held everything together until it nearly destroyed her. The woman who chose herself without asking permission. The silence they mistook for weakness, turned into the distance they couldn't cross. I had stood smiling at that table while they divided what they assumed was theirs. And in the end, I walked away with everything they could never take.